Welcome to this special edition of the Civic Circus podcast. I am Spencer Duncan, and let's start the show.
1, 2, 3, 4.
All right, so this is a little bit different edition. No guests today. Don't worry, this won't be a regular thing. You won't always just have to listen to me talking at you. In fact, that's the last thing I even want to do on a regular basis. But I thought we would cover a topic that's going to be talked about a lot in our community over the next several months as the city of Topeka does our budget. Part of that budget, about 35% of the revenue for our budget, comes from what is called the most hated tax out there, which is property tax. So this special edition is going to be dedicated to the property tax issues. But don't worry, I'm going to try to not get into the weeds. I'm going to try to keep it simple. I'm going to try to keep it not too boring. And so by the time you're done with this, I'm not going to say you're a property tax expert because I'm not sure anybody is, even the people who say they are. But nonetheless, maybe you'll have a little bit better understanding of all the different variables that we have to navigate as we deal with property taxes and making sure, at least from my perspective, that we continue on a path of lowering your property taxes. And if at any point I think I'm getting too boring, I'll know because I'll look over and my producer will be at the board half asleep and I'll be like, oh crap, if I can't keep his attention, then I'm in trouble. So that's how I'll use him as my gauge to know if I'm getting too crazy boring, as it were. So here we go. Let's talk some property taxes. I'm going to break it down into a couple sections, talk a little bit about what property taxes are, how they're collected, how they are factored into our city budget, how they impact you. Then I'm going to talk about what we can do to continue to lower property taxes here, both in the city and honestly across the state of Kansas. So as you all know, property taxes are the annual fee that a homeowner pays to your local government, also your state government. And of course, they do pay for things. They are about a little over 35% of our city budget. So that's how we're helping pay for schools. Well, we don't pay for schools, but we do pay for police and fire and roads and emergency services. That all is a big part of that portion of our budget. But we do that by collecting what we call a mill levy. So you're going to hear lots of talk over the next couple months about the mill levy. The mill levy is actually the actual tax rate that we as a city apply to the assessed value of your property. If you want to figure out how to factor what a mill equals, well, one mill is $1 per $1,000 on your home. So in the city of Topeka, 1 mil right now equals about $1.5 million. So when you hear us say we're going to increase by 1 mil, that would mean we're going to try to collect another $1.5 million. Or if you hear us say we're going to decrease by 1 mil or more, that means we're going to be trying to find ways to cut the budget an additional $1.5 million. I will say the state of Kansas recently passed a law which upped the exemption, which is collected on your home. It was signed into law by Governor Kelly this year. So actually the first $75,000 of appraised value on your home does not count towards your property tax collection. So it's exempted and wiped out that first $75,000. So whatever the value of your home is, you can deduct that. And then you would do that math of $1 per $1,000. I know, complicated, right? But the point is you can exempt the first $75,000. So how do we come up with how much your house is worth? City actually has absolutely no power to control the valuation process. None. That is all done through state law. Some of that's constitutional. We're going to talk about that later and sort of how that complicates things as the state works on the issue. But some of it is statutory. The county hires the appraiser who does all the valuations. So the county appraiser is in charge of those valuations using state law to make those decisions. They have a little bit of local control to make those valuations. So when we as cities set our mill rate, we are doing it based on what the valuations are, but we don't control those valuations. And we're going to talk about that here in a minute, how if we keep a mill rate flat, which the city's going to do this year, your taxes can still go up and how that impacts everybody. So your house is appraised at what they call fair market value under state law, right? That's fair market value is determined by the appraiser using state law. So if you ever wonder, what are they using to even evaluate my house? It's this definition of fair market value. And did you also know that every 6 years, somebody is supposed to come out and actually put eyes on your property? That doesn't mean inside your property, but actually come look at it. I'm going to assume that's happening in Shawnee County. I haven't heard that it hasn't, but you can actually check the date when you look at your appraisal. You can go online, you can ask that. I have heard that when people make an appeal, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, when they appeal their value of the taxes, one of the questions they ask is, when was the last time you actually came out and put eyes on my house? And if it hasn't been within that 6 years, that can help your case. But that's something a lot of folks don't know is they're supposed to actually look at the exterior of your home every 6 years as they do valuations. So I hope that's happening. I'm going to assume it's happening. We actually have a pretty good county appraiser, so I'm going to assume it is, but everyone should be aware of that. So what happens when you get that tax bill and you don't like it? You don't agree with it. You're going to say, oh man, this is way too high. I doubt very many people appeal it because they think it's way too low, although I know that's happened. You have two things you can do. You can appeal it. You may appeal what they call the notice of value, which gets mailed to you, and you have 30 days to appeal that notice. I'm going to talk about that later too, how I don't think that's enough time. 30 days is too short. But you can also file a payment under protest, which also means that you're going to pay the taxes, but you're going to still contend that they were wrong and hope that you can win your appeal at the Board of Tax Appeals and get some of that money back. So that's essentially the process. That's the simple part of the process. I will say too, we have a homestead program at the state of Kansas so that if you are low income and of a certain age, and if you're a veteran or a disabled veteran, you can qualify for that up to $700 to help you pay for your property taxes. I would encourage anyone who's 55 and older, and I believe making total income of $37,500 or less right now, not including your Social Security. The state of Kansas has exempted Social Security from that. Then I would suggest you go online and file for that. I will also say, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, I will take credit for the fact that the city of Topeka also has a homestead tax rebate program, a property tax rebate program that I wrote, that I introduced, and that I got the council to pass 2 years ago. If you are 65 and older, meet that income threshold, or 100% disabled veteran, you qualify for a rebate on your city property tax. So I would also encourage you to do that. You can actually go to CRC, Community Resource Center. They facilitate that program for us, and they will be happy to walk you through that. In fact, told a story not too long ago. I was down at CRC for an event, and they told me that they had a man his wife had passed away a few years ago. She paid all the bills. He hadn't really paid attention to how things, especially like his property taxes, got paid, and he'd fallen behind. And he was embarrassed. He didn't want to tell anybody, but he finally told his children, so they were able to come in and help him get caught up on some of his bills, including his property tax. But he didn't have all the money to pay all those couple of years of taxes that he hadn't paid. He filed for the state homestead program, and he got it, but he still had a gap that he couldn't afford to pay. And he was able to apply for the city tax rebate program. He qualified under our conditions, and we were able to rebate him his city tax back to him for the property tax piece, and it helped him stay in his home, plain and simple. And so when people ask why we do those programs, it's not to give people a free ride. It is to help the people who are truly in need, who need to pay their bills, and understand that sometimes they just need that extra little help to stay in their homes long term, especially when you get to a certain age. I'm not trying to push anyone out of their homes, and property taxes can do that. They are a regressive tax especially for elderly folks, older folks, disabled individuals who are just trying to stay in their home and not have to move elsewhere. So I was glad to hear that story. I know there are several others out there like it. So I will take some credit for that. I know it always sounds braggy, and I hate to be braggy, but I did introduce that program. I'm very proud of it. And there's been a couple efforts to get rid of it, but I'm going to not let that happen. And in fact, I'm going to talk later about how I think we should expand that program. So there is the high-level property tax overview. Let's get a little bit more focused on the city of Topeka and Shawnee County. So there are actually 8 property tax entities in Shawnee County. That's right, 8. The city is just one of them. Now, next year, that's actually only going to be 7. And I'll explain that here in a minute because the state of Kansas made a change. But if you look at your 2025 tax bill, property tax bill, here's how it breaks down. 30% of that goes to the school district. 25% of that goes to 32% of that goes to the county. So the highest is the county. They get 32% of your property tax. 30% then goes to the school district. 25% then comes to the city. So we're third on that list. We're only a quarter of your property tax bill, believe it or not. 5% goes to the library. 3% goes to the transit authority. 3% goes to the airport authority. 2% goes to Washburn University. And 1% went to the state of Kansas. Now, all those other taxing entities, including the airport, the library, transit authority, and Washburn, were approved to have property taxing authority by the state legislature and then approved by the voters of Topeka at some point. City of Topeka cannot create taxing entities, so that was done by both the voters and the state of Kansas. So anyone who wants to revisit any of those, and I'm not suggesting that, but those are conversations you have to have with those entities and the state. The city is not in any position to make changes to any of those taxing entities. The state of Kansas's 1% will go away next year for this reason. They collect 2 mills at the state, 20 mills, 20 mill levy, which goes to schools. That's part of the school district mill levy, and 1.5 mills that has gone to state facilities to help them pay for upkeep for buildings across the state. They eliminated this past legislative session the 1.5 mills. So next year in your 2026 property tax bill, you will not see the state of Kansas 1.5 mills. 20% or 20 mills they will still collect, although it won't be labeled as state of Kansas. It will be part of the school board or school district, but it actually goes to the state, which they then redistribute across the state of Kansas to all the school districts. So clear as mud, right? But the point is, I always tell people moving forward, you still have 7 property taxing entities in Shawnee County. So while it's perfectly cool and okay, and we're happy to have the conversation about frustration with the city tax levy, we're not the only ones. And I'm not trying to throw any of my colleagues and other entities under the bus because they've all got bills to pay too. But it's not just an us issue. It is a county, school district, other taxing authority issue. And we've all got to kind of be on the same page if we want to see some kind of property tax reduction while also still finding a balance to pay for stuff, to make sure I can pay my fire department and my police and keep building roads. So those are the percentages. So in the city of Topeka, we currently collect 36.956 mills. That is our mill levy, 36.956. At a recent meeting, we were reminded that every year, here's the state process. You're going to hear about this word called revenue neutral, and you're going to hear it a lot over the next couple months as we go through the budget. 5 years ago, the state of Kansas passed this thing called the revenue neutral rate. What that is the county treasurer every year goes in and calculates if a taxing entity, and since I'm with the city, I'll just use the city. If the city didn't capture any new money from the new valuations and stayed revenue neutral from the year before, what would your mill levy be? So what does that mean? That means that this year, the average valuation of homes has gone up, it looks like about 4.2%. If we stay at 36.956 mills, that means that we would collect that 4.2%. So I can keep my mill levy flat, but I will collect more taxes because I will capture that 4% increase in your property tax bill as a city, right? Now, that's about in line with inflation right now. And so I could make a case that we may need to do that because inflation impacts us all and things cost more for us as a city also. I'm not actually going to make that case because I still think we can lower your property tax, but that's a valid case when I hear it from people that they make. So if we stay at 36.956 mills, 2 things are very true for elected people to say. I did not raise your mill levy, which is a good thing. And I will tell you, if we do, it's going to be 15 years since the city of Topeka raised their mill levy. And more importantly, since I got on the council 6 years ago, we've lowered it by 3.5 mills. And I've been someone every year who has proposed mill levy decreases and pushed for that. And so I will, again, I'll take a little credit for working hard the last couple of years to have a lower mill levy today than when I took office 6 years ago. Having said that, I also understand your taxes still go up even if we've stayed flat or have reduced our mill levy the last several years. So what we were told by the state was if we wanted to be revenue neutral, not capture that 4.2%, so your city tax wouldn't go up 4%, we would be at 35.183 mills. That's a difference of about 1.7 mills, which equates to about $2.2 million that we would then have to cut from the budget on top of what we also are facing about a $15 million budget deficit. Some people are fine with that. Great, go cut that $2.2 million. Other people say, whoa, you just gave my police and fire a raise, and I'd like to make sure that they keep their raise. Maybe we need to stay flat. That will be the conversation we will have over the next 3 months as we work through the budget, which we were required to submit to the state of Kansas by October 1st. So we will have to pass it by the end of September to move that budget on. So that's what it means. Now, here's what we did. We have already promised as a city that we are going to keep the mill levy at worst the same as it has been the last several years. We have to submit to the state of Kansas and to the county treasurer our intention to exceed that revenue neutral rate. So revenue neutral rate, I told you, would be 35.183. We did submit a thing that said, well, we'll we might exceed that, but we're going to only go, the highest we're going to go is 36.95, which is our current mill rate. So we've already committed, and I made that motion to make that amendment. Again, taking lots of credit here because, as you'll learn, I don't like property taxes either. They may be the most hated. I don't know if they're really the most hated, but I'll tell you, I don't like them either, as much as you do, and I understand the need to lower them. But I made that motion that guaranteed that at worst, your mill levy in the city of Topeka will not increase. So we submitted that. We will have a hearing on that issue I believe it's in September. Actually, that's a lie. It's in August. Sometime in August, we will have a hearing that people can come tell us whether they'd like us to go to the revenue neutral rate or stay at somewhere in between the 36.95 and the 35.183. So that's how revenue neutral works. It's a little confusing, although we've been able to manage it. So yes, it is true that the city of Topeka has said we might exceed the revenue neutral, but I will say we're not going to increase the mill levy. But Ian, your taxes might go up because 4.2% increase if we stay at that 36.95. I will also say there have been years I voted to stay revenue neutral twice before. One year I didn't because we were actually only half a mil above the revenue neutral rate. And one year we were actually almost right at it. But people's property taxes bills still went up those years because, again, there were 7 other taxing entities that all exceeded the revenue neutral rate. So sometimes even when one of those entities stays revenue neutral or very close to it and doesn't capture the increase, your property tax bill is still going to go up because all the other entities exceeded it and captured that percentage to some degree. So it's kind of if we all do it, you definitely won't see an increase. But if only some of us do it and some of us don't, you're always going to continue to see a property tax increase. So we're going to see how that shakes out over the next few months. I think we could stay revenue neutral this year. That's just Spencer, of course, talking here. But I am proud that at least at the worst case, we're not going to exceed anything that we're currently at and try to keep our budget as flat as possible. We're going to have to make a lot of cuts because, again, we're a $15 million deficit. I had someone ask me the other day, Spencer, why do you have a $15 million deficit? And I can tell you the 2 biggest drivers of that. We gave our police department a $6 million raise this year because we did a market study that said we were below value, below market rate. We had to get up to market rate, and that's expensive, and that costs us. And I want to apologize for giving those officers a raise because I want to retain and keep them. But that's a $6 million hit that wasn't on the books until 2026. And also, inflation and the cost of goods has gone up in some cases 50%, in some cases 100%. But when you look at that, that adds about another $4 or $5 million. So the truth is, that's about $11 million of that deficit right there. So we got to work through that. And that will be a big conversation as we talk about whether we can then cut another $2 million if we want to stay revenue neutral to keep your property tax bill low. I don't know the answer. We'll see. I hope people pay attention. And I hope that some of that made some sense. And if not, remember, you can always email me at duncanfortopeka@yahoo.com and say, what the heck were you talking about? Explain it, man, a little bit more, or just give me a call and I'm happy to have that conversation. I think the big thing, though, I get asked is, okay, I get your situation, right? Property taxes, Topeka is only 25%. We've got all these different taxing entities. The city isn't in charge of the valuations. So what the heck can we as a city actually do then to make sure that I'm paying the bills and reducing your property taxes? It can be done, and I want to walk through some of those things now with you just to kind of give an overview of what I think we need to be doing. And there's 3 levels to it. One is what needs to be done at the state level. One is what needs to be done sort of at the county level and with our other taxing partners. And then the third piece is what we can keep doing at the city to bring down your property tax bill. So I'm going to break it down that way. And before I get that, I will tell you, for every dollar you spend for the general fund, so every dollar I collect from you as a taxing entity, here's where it goes to in our general fund. 45% of that dollar goes to police and code. 31 cents of that dollar goes to fire. So I want to point out that of the city budget, what is that math? 45, 65, 75, 85, 86%, right? No, 76%. I can do math, I promise. 76% of our budget, general fund budget, goes to public safety. That's a lot, but it's also not uncommon for a city to have that as their number one cost outside of infrastructure costs, which is a big one too, but that's kind of a separate entity because we take sales tax for that. But that's a lot. So understand, when we make cuts in our budget, 76% of our budget is police and fire. At some point, you have to start looking at those departments to make true cuts. And so those are really tough decisions to make, and what their impact's going to be on the level of service you get. General government, which is all of our general services that we offer, is 14 cents of your dollar. Public Works gets 7 cents of your dollar, and our planning department gets 3 cents of your dollar. So that's kind of the breakdown of where every dollar goes that we collect for you for the general fund. So here's how we're going to lower your property taxes. Here's the plan to help the cause. All right, so let's start with the state level. As I said, the state got rid of their 1.5 mills, but they still collect 20 mills on behalf of the school districts. The state, when they passed the revenue neutral law, made it only apply to all other taxing entities, not to the state of Kansas. So when they collect those 20 mills, every year they're automatically collecting that increase in valuation without having to take the same vote that they've asked every other elected official in Kansas to take every year and hold hearings. We would argue that that needs to be equalized. They should also have to go on the floor of the Senate and go on the floor of the House and take a vote to tell people whether they want to go above the revenue neutral rate for the 20 mills collected on behalf of cities or on behalf of schools. That just seems fair. That seems equitable. It's also really easy when you pass laws that don't apply to you to not understand how they impact everybody if you're not making them apply the same. So we would like to see that change. I think it would make a difference. It would make them have this same conversation in a different way. And also it'd make them understand the difference of what losing that 4%, say this year, whatever that percent is every year, would impact on their budget to our school system. The other thing we'd like to see the state do is they need to work on the valuation system. Right now, we can continue to lower the mill levy. And honestly, if you have lived in Shawnee County over the last several years, overall, your mill levy has gone down because the county has reduced it, the city has reduced it, and even the school district has reduced it. And the others have stayed relatively flat. So overall, the mill levy in Shawnee County is lower today than it was 5 years ago. But your taxes keep going up. That's not a fault 100% of the local taxing entities. That is a fault with the valuation system that keeps pushing valuations up while not factoring in the impact it's having on the local government piece of it. So there needs to be a change to how they do the valuation system at the state level. There are two primary ideas that are being floated at the Capitol. One is a rolling average system that would say over time, we just use a rolling average instead of it jumping every year, which would eventually flatten the rate, but allow it to stay at market value. I kind of like that system better than some other options. It works. We use it in our ag system, and it would definitely make sure that we don't see these spikes that we saw, say, 3-4 years ago of 18, 22%, back-to-back years. That was ridiculous, made no sense. But it also makes sure we'd stay at market value. There's also a plan out there that would just cap. That would say every year you couldn't go above 3%. Valuations could never be above 3%. That would be a constitutional amendment. I'm not as fond of it, but at least it's better than nothing. And so I've told legislators, look, you got to do something. And the last few years when they've gone up to the legislature, they've discussed it, they've debated it, and they just haven't been able to land on a solution. And that's got to get fixed. There's got to be changes of that valuation system. I can tell you my day job as government affairs director for the League of Kansas Municipalities, which represents all the cities of Kansas. We have got a working group put together to try to be a little more proactive, to bring some things to the legislature that address these issues, to help them find a path to fixing the valuation system to be more in line with what local governments are doing so that we can continue to lower your mill rate and it actually see a decrease instead of it always being just contingent upon whatever the valuations are. The other thing they need to do, as I mentioned earlier, is you only get 30 days to appeal your tax valuation. I think that should be extended to 45 or 60 days. I think mail takes a little bit longer now, and then you only have a week or two to actually figure out what you're going to do. We need to make sure you have a full 30 days to contemplate it. So I think that needs to be extended to 45 or 60 days. And then at some point, I'm glad that the state got rid of their 1.5 mills as a reduction, but they maybe should take a look at the 20 mills and if there's any reduction there that they can offer people on the state level. So there's a few things that the state can do that I know the city of Topeka advocates for and that I do in my day job with the League of Municipalities. Second added piece of this is what can the county and the other taxing entities do? First of all, we got a lot of properties, vacant, empty properties that are eligible for tax sales that have not been put on the tax sale. And because of that, they're essentially not on the tax rolls. They're behind in property tax payments, which means we're not collecting as much property tax. And the goal of a healthy system is everybody's paying a little bit instead of a few people paying a lot. And when people don't pay those taxes and we have hundreds, if not 1,000 or more, and actually I think it's 1,000 or more tax properties eligible for tax sale that aren't on the tax rolls, that hurts the budget overall, which puts more pressure on all you out there who are actually paying your taxes. So we have got to work with the county to get those on tax sales, get them in the hands of people who will refurbish them, rebuild on them, and pay their property taxes on time. If we do that, boy, we would take a lot of strain off the system. The other thing we need to work with the county treasurer on is the comparables. If you get your property tax statement every year, you know that part of that isn't just the valuation system. They look at comps. They call them comps. And they look at these comps, and there's usually 5, and they say your house is comparable to these 5. Therefore, this average is also what gets us to your valuation. Problem is, I've now seen too many tax bills where there's sometimes an outlier or several outliers on those comps. Give you 2 examples. One was most of the houses were in line. They were about in the $210,000 range, $205,000. But there was one that was like at $275,000. Now, that's not a lot, but if you add $50,000, $60,000 into that average, that can add 1% or so to your total. And the reason that house sold more was because it had a tennis court and a swimming pool in it. Well, that's not comparable to all the other houses in the neighborhood that don't have a swimming pool and don't have a tennis court, right? They shouldn't have factored that in. They should have had a way to look at it and say, there's clearly this doesn't apply. This house shouldn't be factored into these comparables. Second one is, I knew a guy who lived near Potwin, not in Potwin. 2 of the houses, for some reason, on his comps were Potwin homes that were worth much more than his home that was not in Potwin, right? Yes, technically they're in the same little neighborhood and the same area, and he may have only been a block off, but his home wasn't comparable to the homes in Potwin. Yet his property tax bill reflected those 2 comps, which were considerably higher. There has to be a way to fix that to make sure that doesn't happen. At the very least, there should be a quick way to appeal that, especially at the Board of Tax Appeals, to say, I'm willing to pay my fair share, but these comparables don't make any sense. And the other thing I wish all the other taxing entities would do is do what the city of Topeka has done and create their own tax rebate program, their own homestead program, their own tax rebate program. I definitely think the county should do it, as they're the largest collector of property tax. And again, I don't fault them for that. People don't realize the county actually gets very little sales tax, so they are much more reliant on property tax than the rest of us. But nonetheless, I wish they'd offer a rebate program similar to what we have to help people in the city be able to fill that gap. And if they're in those situations where they're a certain age, low income, veterans who are disabled. So I'd like to see them do it. So think about it, Shawnee County. Think about it, school districts. Think about it, all you other taxing entities. We've made it work. I know you can make it work, and we've already set the standard for you, so we know it can be plugged and play. The last thing I think we all need to do is get together on the same page and advocate for this stuff together at the Capitol, so that we can, as a collective unit of Shawnee County and of Topeka, go up to the state level and say, fix this, make this work. This is what Shawnee County, we're the 4th largest county maybe, in the state of Kansas. We're the 5th largest city. We're the capital city. Let's get together and get these changes at the state level. So lastly, what can we do at the city of Topeka? What can we keep plugging away on to make sure we can lower your property taxes here? Well, the first is we got to keep a steady mill levy, which we've been doing. I understand it can go lower. Like I told you, I have voted to stay revenue neutral. I'd like to think we could do it this year. But at least we're not raising your mill levy, and that's not nothing. It's not the solution, and it does mean, like I said, your taxes could go up those 4%, but we haven't raised it in 15 years. We've lowered it over the last several. That's a more positive trend than some other places, and so we've got to continue to keep on that path. I'd like to expand our rebate program. I think that right now, 75% of your Social Security income is exempt. I'd like that to be 100%. I'd also like to take a look at how it would impact first-time home buyers. Not for long-term, but maybe for the first 2 to 5 years when they buy a home, give them that rebate while they get on their feet, able to afford that home as they've just bought it, and then make sure they're long-time, consistent home buyers here, owners here in the state or city of Topeka. So I'd like to extend that. That one's a little controversial because you're giving people who may be able to handle it the ability, but there's a lot of first-time home buyer programs out there, and I think if we added that rebate program to it, we'd encourage a lot of people and help them afford to buy a home for the first time. Some of it too is we got to keep on our budget, right? We got to keep reviewing it. We got to keep spending down. We got to keep looking at our costs and making sure every year that we're not overpaying for things. If we keep the budget manageable, then that keeps our taxes down because I don't need as much money. The other thing we can do is we've got to get better about vacant properties. Yes, the county we're kind of relying on them to make those tax sales, but we also have mechanisms we can take legally to push some of those, especially, truthfully, commercial side of it, which create a lot of problems. And if we got a little tougher on the commercial side and got some of those rehabbed and not vacant, we'd get a lot more property tax from those commercial properties than we would out of homeowners. It would be equitable tax. I'm not trying to overtax them, but I'm just saying we would be able to help the cause a lot and bring in more revenue. And the last thing is this thing called pilot fees. These are payment in lieu of taxes. Under the state of Kansas, if let's say you don't pay property taxes because you are a nonprofit, you are tax exempt from property taxes. Well, you could come to the city under state law and say, we understand we don't pay property taxes, but we also know that police and fire are going to show up if we need them. And you have to pay for those services, which we appreciate. You can give us money in lieu of taxes, payment in lieu of taxes. I will tell you right now that as of today, we don't have a single entity in the city of Topeka who does that voluntarily. That's disappointing because we have, I believe it's 5 of our 7, if not 7 of our 10 top employers in this city do not pay property taxes. That's a big number, folks. And I'm glad they're here. They employ people. They pay people. They are important to our economy. They generate sales tax. They make sure people are coming into the city of Topeka. They are economic activity and development and growth, and I appreciate every piece of that. I also know that they are on our streets. We have police calls that go out to those places, and we have fire calls that go out to those places, and that costs all the other taxpayers money. It would be nice if some of those organizations who are quite profitable, to be perfectly honest with you, gave us some sort of pilot fees, payment in lieu of taxes. One of the things we are working on with staff that I'm working on now is some sort of sheet we can give to these people that say, hey, if you want to give us a pilot, here's a suggested amount based on maybe it's square footage of your property. And it's low, but it's not nothing. I'm not trying to, under state law, I cannot make this mandatory, and I don't want to. I'm not trying to tax churches. Let's be very clear about that, right? Because none of them pay taxes either. But I've actually had some churches ask, well, I guess we could pay in. What would we pay if we were going to do that? And I don't have a good answer for that. And so we need to come up with a sheet so we can give it to these folks, some of these very large entities that don't pay property taxes, and let them know it'd be nice if you could pay. And if they don't, they don't. But it is disappointing as a capital city, as a city that I actually believe in Kansas has more nonprofit entities than any other city in our state. That comes being a capital city. Means we got a lot of folks who aren't paying those property taxes. And again, the goal is to get everyone to pay a little instead of lots of us, or instead of few of us paying a lot. That's the goal. We want to spread the tax burden around so it's not a burden for everybody. So that's what we can do in the city of Topeka. That's a lot of stuff about property taxes, man. That's why I tried to keep this one short today, not too long, not fill your head with too much. You might have to listen to it 3 times. It's like going back and watching the movie Inception. You're like, did I get it on the first time? I may have to go watch it a couple more times. That might be this podcast, and that's fine. But I do want to tell everybody it's complicated, it's tough, it's not cut and dry, and there's a lot of moving parts. But I will tell you, besides myself, who's been pretty tough about this every year since I've been elected, we have several other council members who also really want to see this burden, and they're trying hard to find a way to balance it between lowering property taxes and, again, paying the bills. So anytime you have a question, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can also check out my initiative, some of the stuff I went through today on my website at duncanfortopeka.com to get more information and all my contact information. And with that, I hope everybody's head doesn't hurt too much after this short little podcast, but I appreciate you listening to this special edition, and thank you for listening, everybody.